Hello, everyone. You have it good, is what I was told when I was once doing Rideshare. And the reason I was told that is because that's what I was asked. I would be asked, "Do you have any kids?" Now, I would get this question from both genders. Like I would have men ask me, and then I would have women ask me, and it was totally different. Men would, and it's all the different races. It wasn't even a race thing. So, I would pick up a passenger and take them to where they need to go. And somewhere in between there, the conversation would be about, society, how it's going, inflation, how everything costs. Sometimes the client would bring up certain things in relationships. And then out of the blue, they would say, "Hey, you have any kids?" And I would be like, "Oh, no, 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 no. I don't have any kids. No, no, no kids at all." And then they would be like, "For real?" At least the men. The men would be like, "For real?" I'll be like, "Yeah, for real. No, no, no kids." And then they'll be like, "You got it good." And the first time I heard it, I'm like, "All right, that's probably just a man to man thing." But like when Joseph told me that, Joseph was a guy from Colorado. I picked him up um, from a hotel in downtown Fort Worth. He was on business and he had to go to Arlington, so I picked him up. And once he learned that I didn't have any kids, because he brought it up and told me, of course, you got it good, he started telling me about his troubles. He had three kids by three different women, all three different races. And he even told me, he was like, "Hey, I'm done with having kids." He's like, "I don't even do committed relationships. He's like, due to my job, I meet women because I travel." And he was basically saying that he was transparent with them. And he was like, "Yeah, I just have financial troubles due to, you know, hiccups with his baby moms. All three of them, again, all three of them were all different races." And through that conversation, I learned that in Colorado, men have to pay child support up to 21 years old, 21 years of age. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." I was like, that's wild." I mean, I believed it. I was like, he would have no reason to lie. But then I looked it up for myself eventually, and sure enough, I was like, my goodness, my goodness. So I got him to where he needed to be. I'm still on the journey of helping people being of service. Then I pick up Marcus. By this time, it's dark out. I'm driving him to a hotel, picked him up from like Walmart. And he was like, "Man, how long you been driving?" I was like, "This is my 12th hour." At the time, it was on my 12th hour. And he was like, "Man, you work hard." He was like, "Are you a single father?" And I was like, "Heck no, I'm not a single father." He's like, "You don't got no kids?" And this guy was black. I'm like, "Nah, no kids, no kids." And then he says, "I remember, I used to be just like you." And I was like, "Man, what happened?" He said, life happened. He ended up having some kids. And he was like, "But why you work so hard?" I was like, "I got to stay in motion. I have to be like the sun and stay in motion." That was a short commute. Got him to the hotel. It was the one in Fort Worth, not too far from the Shell gas station in that Waffle House. So I dropped him off. It was this another time. The setting was evening time, pick up this man and this woman. I'm assuming they was together. I never asked, but you just assume, if they're not brother and sister, that they could have been friends or they could have been a couple. Either way, they're in the back seat, and maybe it was my energy I was giving off. I don't know. I just was doing my job at the time, getting them to where they needed to be. And then she was like, "May I ask you something?" And I was like, "Sure." Because in my mind, I was like, "You can ask whatever, We're in the United States, you can ask whatever you want to ask. No crimes being committed." So she was like, "Do you have any kids?" I was like, "Nah, I don't have no kids." And then the dude was like, "Man, you got it good." And I just started laughing because by now I'm so used to hearing it from the men. And then the young lady, Leslie, she was like, "Why you don't have no kids?" And I was like, I just kept it professional. I was just like, "Hey, I'm just a disciplined guy. I'm just a real disciplined guy, and when if it was meant to happen, then it would happen." And then I went on to say, it's a lot of freedom, not having kids in the sense just being able to work 12 hours a day if I want to, come home, hear silence, and you get to keep some money in your pocket allegedly because everything costs. He chuckled. She was like, "Well, you need to have some kids." I was thinking, I hear you. But again, I'm keeping it professional. If I wasn't doing Rideshare, I would have said something probably different. I would have still kept it normal. I wouldn't have said anything out of pocket because there was no reason for all of that. But I'm like, I chuckle. So I push on. I drive between the lines in the road, pick up another woman, and her name was Jessica, and I picked her up from the dentist at the time, and I was taking her to a relative's house. It was a relative residency, and she jumped in the car just talking about her kids. You know, she was like, these kids don't listen, you know, and I didn't say anything. And then she's like, "You know what I mean?" And I was like, "I know what you mean, but not really, because I don't have any kids." She was like, "Wow, you don't have no kids?" And I was like, "No, I don't have any kids, fortunately." And then the next thing she said, "Well, kids are such a blessing." I was like, "Yeah, that's what I've been told. That's what I've heard. And some kids are a blessing. However, some kids are a straight nightmare." Now, I didn't say that because there was no need to say that. I didn't want to over communicate. So I just, keep driving, getting into where she need to go. And then she's like, "Well, why you don't have no kids? Are you dating?" And I didn't even want to get into all that. I was like, "Hey, I'm just focused on getting you to where you need to be because that's the main thing. The main thing is making sure you get to your destination quickly and safely." Thus, she chuckled and she said, "Well, maybe one day." By the time I was done working, it dawned on me like the men are advocating for me just to stay, how I was then and how I still currently am with not having any kids. And all the women were like, "You should have children. Why you don't have a family?" Woo, woo. I was like, interesting. You know, I always knew we weren't equal, thus being men and women, but at least not on that front. It just made me chuckle. I was like, "Wow, you have it good," is what all the fellas would say. Now, every now and then, a woman will hop in my car when kids would come up, she would be like, "Great, don't have them. You're doing the right thing." I'm like, look at this advocate. Her kids getting on her nerves. Now she advocating for me not to have none. But you have it good is what they would tell me when I was doing Rideshare. And the topic children came up and they saw that, they learned that I didn't have any. And for some reason, you know, some was intrigued by it, and others told me that, hey, you're doing the right thing. So yeah, that's all for today. And like, share, and subscribe. Y'all have a good one. Later.